Hello. Welcome to this afternoon's symposium. Thank you for coming out. So this is the first symposium of 2022, and so we have a few notes about events that are happening in honors coming up soon. If you are planning on writing an honors tutorial, those are due today by 5, so hopefully you already got that in, for students with 90 credits or more. A few deadlines are coming up in March that you might want to go ahead and mark in your calendars. One is the continuing in honors deadline for first-year students only. That's March 1st. And the other is the Oxford Study Abroad deadline, which is March 4th, and both applications are on Submittable. And you can find those links also at uthonors.com, which is our blog. The next symposium is a coffee conversation on February 15th at 10 a.m. in the McKay Kitchen. These are capped at 20. If you don't know what these are, they're these small group chats over coffee about an issue in the news. And that event is currently sold out, but has a wait list on Eventbrite, the link for which can be found also at uthonors.com. And Eventbrite will email you if someone cancels and a ticket becomes available. So if that interests you, go ahead and sign up for that. If you're looking to get more involved in honors, or you're just looking for more ACE engagement points, the Honors Executive Council is planning a few upcoming events. One is a field day social that's going to be February 15th at 5 p.m. with food and games worth 10 engagement points. More on the location will be sent to your weekly email digest that you get every week around Friday. Another is a sand volleyball tournament planned for February 28th at 7 p.m. in McKay. That's worth the same number of ACE points, 10. If you're looking to satisfy your ACE points with service opportunities, the Service Committee is planning a Habitat for Humanities build on February 12th at 7:30 in the morning. It's a weekend. The link to sign up for that event is going to be sent out in a weekly digest email if it has not been sent out already, and will also be posted to the blog. So now for our symposium. Dr. Rose Trentinella is an assistant teaching professor of art and design at the University of Tampa. As an art historian, Dr. Trentinella's academic interests include Greco-Roman and Italian Renaissance art, especially their convergence during the rediscovery of antiquity in the 15th and 16th centuries. As a scholar, Dr. Trentinella's research centers on the scholarship of teaching and learning, with a particular focus on how pedagogies of interdisciplinary fields such as art history can be most effective for student learning. Her talk today is titled Art History as an Answer to Life, the Universe, and Everything. Please help me welcome Dr. Trentinella.
Good afternoon. Anyone get the reference? Really? Okay, cool. They're all cited, so it's fine. I'm Dr. Rose Trentinella. I'm here to make you rethink your very existence in the universe for a little while. As an assistant teaching professor, my microphone is here, we'll see if it works. As an assistant teaching professor, my role here is primarily for teaching, so it's convenient for me that my scholarship also focuses on pedagogy and finding effective strategies for translating esoteric subjects into things that actually make sense to students, from the student perspective, from a scholarly perspective, and everything in between. So, as an art historian, I was trained to focus really narrowly on minute aspects of aesthetic design, historical analysis, like, for example, why did a specific artist make art this way, in this time, for these people? Just really focused evidence, logic, analysis, conclusion. I'm still interested in those things, but ever hear of art history? What have you heard? The good, the bad, the ugly? I'm serious, this is an interactive situation. Not economically viable. Kind of useless. A waste of time. You're nodding. I'm not going to go on. You get my point. What if I told you that art history could be an answer to life, the universe, and everything? I hear you. Get the reference? At least you got that one. Okay, good. Good. At least there was one. So a little bit about the scholarship of teaching and learning. Pedagogy is the method and practice of teaching and educational methods. Not what you're teaching, but how you're teaching it. What if I propose to you the idea that a discipline like art history which you think you know what it means, that has been called useless, can actually provide a framework for learning or being able to learn anything you would need to know in any facet of your life at any given time. Are you intrigued? Maybe just a little bit? Cool. Because the discipline itself is quite old, but also very traditional. So they're kind of stuck in their ways a bit. There's not a lot of art historians who are moving away from content I need my students to learn and memorize and regurgitate on exams, never to be remembered again, toward what skills do I need my students to gain, no matter what content I'm teaching them, that will be successful in my classroom, an art history classroom, but then they can take to any other discipline and leverage them, transfer them, and be successful. So that's what we're going to talk about. How many of you came to college to learn the answer? An answer to life, the universe. You came to college because somebody told you it was the only way to get a good job. You came to college because you believe, yes, this is a way that I'm going to be successful. I need this. Honesty, I love it. How many of you have ever experienced a little bit of distress, some anxiety, discomfort, when you realize that at any given moment there was not one clear solution to a problem? Cool, you're a human, congratulations. You know, when there's oh wait, there's no one right answer, how do I know if I'm wrong? Yeah? It's kind of distressing, those moments. So any of you who identify with this last question, where are my STEM hard science people? Yeah, you feel me right now, right? You do an experiment, it either comes out good or it comes out failed, and you do it again until you get the right answer. Chem majors? Biology. Physics. Darn. No astrophysicists? I'll have to adapt, that's fine. Math? Math is special. You guys like your theory, right? Yeah, see, I got you. Okay. Zoom out from your own discipline. How do humans go about answering big questions? Like the really, really big ones. I already asked if there were astrophysicists. I didn't see any. We'll just make it up as we go. Really big questions. What's a big question? Sparked by this image. Please, I need feedback, otherwise this is going to get boring real fast. I show you an image. Yes, sir? Do aliens exist? That is a huge question that I have no answer to, so don't ask me. But that's a big question. I show you this picture, and that's what you think of. Blue t-shirt.
What is tangible and what's not tangible?
I love it. What is tangible and what is not tangible? There was somebody right behind you with the sunglasses on top of the head. How was the universe created? How did we get here? How does any of this exist, right? If I had any astrophysicists in the audience, you might be able to tell me, but I'll tell you. You guys see that cluster of tiny little red dots? Those are baby stars. This is an image taken by the Hubble Space Telescope that uses various filters to cut through the cloud of the nebula to see into a star cluster, where various types of gases, like oxygen or nitrogen or any of those other things, are then coded to show up as various colors, like red or brown or blue or green. And so this is effectively a star nursery that scientists can investigate through photos like this and figure out, how do stars get born? Science, am I right? We feel like we have an interesting question. How did the universe get created? We invent cool things like telescopes, giant space cameras, and programs to change gas in space into a color that we can then read to figure out something we're interested in learning. But here's a question. The scientific method, if you're familiar with it, you start with an empirical observation and then you ask some questions about it, right? Like, I see a phenomenon, it seems weird, and then you hypothesize about it. You guys, sounds about like what you've ever been told about the scientific method, sure. must that process begin with an empirical observation? My math person over here is shaking her head at me. Why not? What could the scientific process start with instead? You're wearing a black mask, and you admitted to being a mathematician, so I see you shaking your head. An observation? Same thing. You observed something. That's officially, how we're going to define empirical is that it was observed. It exists. Like, it's independently verifiable. How else possibly could the investigation begin? Does it feel like that's not something that ever gets talked about? That's not what you're expecting to be asked? Okay. Okay. Why? Yeah. Scientific method. We all know what this looks like. Notice how it starts with make an observation, then ask a question, and everything then follows from there. Let's test the theory, the possibility. This sequence of images was also captured by the Hubble and demonstrates what happens when a light pulse was emitted from a star, V838 Mon. Over the course of 2 years, that pulse expands. Light travels at a speed. It's very fast, but it still takes time. And the sequence of photographs, you guys see how it is expanding and illuminating the cloud of dust as it goes. It's kind of unfortunate. I really wish I had a physicist in the house or an astrophysicist to tell me, okay, I'm showing you a sequence of images. What do we learn from this? Let me just ask you guys to guess. You don't have to be a physicist. Sequence of images, light travels. What research question might a scientist develop from this data? Wild guesses. I don't care what the right answer is. I want an answer. Yes?
How can we apply the way this behaves to other things in the universe?
Woo, transference. Yeah? So I see a phenomenon. I've measured it. I know when I've taken the photographs. I can probably measure light years. How can I take what I've learned from here and apply it somewhere? Where do you think else we could apply it? Into what other, like more astronomy questions? Maybe a pulse from another star? Anyone want to go outside astronomy? You know what somebody did think when they saw this, the first thing they thought? Had nothing to do with astronomy. They said, oh, hey, Van Gogh. Who's thinking Van Gogh right now? Oh, wait. I'm assuming you know what or who Van Gogh is. Yeah. Van Gogh? There we go. That was a bad pun. Made it by accident. What do you know about Van Gogh? Anything at all. It could be from like really bad soap opera. I really don't care. What do you know about Van Gogh? Other than apparently he painted this. Yes? He was not appreciated in his time? Not a lot of people know that, and that's true. Good job. He did, I don't know if it's most, but he did a lot of painting in a psychiatric hospital, in a mental asylum. Yes, also true. 2 for 2. Yes? He did cut off his own ear. That is true. Some other guy almost got blamed for it, but we think he did it, and then he ended up giving it to a prostitute. It's a whole thing that actually happened. One more thing that you know about Van Gogh. It's a whole thing. Yeah, cut off his own ear, self-admitted to a psychiatric hospital, suffered from depression and anxiety his life, was not appreciated in his own time. There's one way back there.
Was he colorblind?
Ooh, I don't know that one if he was colorblind. I kind of doubt it, based on what I know from his letters and what I see in his paintings. But that could be tested. That's an interesting research question that we could probably investigate. Was Van Gogh colorblind? Okay. Looking at this one, have you ever studied it? Been shown it, thought about it? I don't know. You know anything? You're nodding at me like, yes, I've seen it before. Why would an astrophysicist look at this and go to this? Yeah.
Because you start to see the expansion of light in Van Gogh's paintings, and that's the same way that the sky is expanding.
Look in the sky of Van Gogh's painting Starry Night and find some stars. And notice that his very distinctive style of painting, this impasto smearing on of globs of paint, his paintings are quite literally, they have texture, because he would smear giant globs of paint. It's called impasto technique. in these, around the stars, concentric circles that seem to be radiating out. We just finished talking about radiating light. But let me check my math. 1889, pretty sure the Hubble didn't exist then, so this one came first. Here is something that you may not know. That some scientists are observing astronomical phenomenon. Luminescence, luminance, star clusters, all these things. And someone decided, well, you know, Van Gogh, his paintings are very effective. When people look at them, they can't really look away very easily. There's something about them that really attracts your attention. I wonder why. And they did scientific analyses of the luminance of this painting and mapped it. That said, it's not the colors that he's using, it's their brightness that they could measure. And they realized that the differential of the luminance of his colors actually matches turbulence in space. Space turbulence, when it's measured scientifically, creates certain graph results. And when they measured Van Gogh's sky, they realized it actually matched. Physicists, apparently, have been struggling with how to map turbulence for I don't know how long. I'm not a physicist. In 1889, Van Gogh allegedly looked out of his window and apparently saw the universe. How many of you are like, Van Gogh, wasn't he crazy? I mean, that's a bad word, in a sense. It's pretty disparaging. Cut off his own ear. We judge. We're human. We judge. He could see the truth of the universe that it took at least another, I don't know, maybe 100 years? When was the Hubble? Anybody know the year of the Hubble? It was like maybe in the 60s or the 70s? Let's say it took another almost a century for science to catch up to prove what he somehow had already figured out. Can you guys see what I mean about art history? I'm talking about astrophysics. Well, if we talk about himself, an art historian, this is how they would approach the painting. So, first step, you take your object, you describe it, you look at it very closely and see what did the artist choose to do? What is this? For example, forgive me, I'm going to read a small passage from the Museum of Modern Art website. Look at the painting and see if you can translate the words to what is there. This mid-scale, oil on canvas painting is dominated by a moon and star-filled night sky. It takes up 3/4 of the picture plane and appears turbulent, even agitated, with intensely swirling patterns that seem to roll across its surface like waves. It is pocked with bright orbs, including the crescent moon to the far right, and Venus, the morning star, to the left of center, surrounded by concentric circles of radiant white and yellow light. If I had asked you guys to describe this, would it have been that poetical? Probably not. It takes a lot of practice to do that. It also sounds hella subjective, right? How many of my scientists in the room like, oh gosh, no, too many adjectives? Yeah, just wait. This is the most traditional methodology of art history. Careful aesthetic observation and description, because your primary evidence is a work of art that is visible, generally speaking. Let's go next. Next part of the description. Beneath this expressive sky sits a hushed village of humble houses surrounding a church, whose steeple rises sharply above the undulating blue-black mountains in the background. A cypress tree sits at the foreground of this night scene. Flame-like, it reaches almost to the top edge of the canvas, serving as a visual link between land and sky. Was this a little bit more like, oh God, make it stop, it's too much like poetry, there's nothing objective about this? Cypress trees are not flame-like. They're literally, you're nodding at me. See, okay, good. This is good feedback. I get it. Cool. Yes, this is like the word humble, the word hushed, flame-like. Those are different scholars would not choose those words, right? It feels not like a hard science. They get divided into soft sciences or soft subjects. I get it. Next section, wait for it because it changes. Considered symbolically, the cypress could be seen as a bridge between life, as represented by the earth, and death, as represented by the sky, commonly associated with heaven. Cypresses were also regarded as trees of the graveyard, and mourning. Is that description anymore? Or have we moved on to interpretation? Are any of you skeptical of this interpretation? Have any of you been told what to think about a work of art and you're like, it's just like your opinion, man. You can't tell me what to think. I mean, I'm going to say, like, the reputation of art history, sometimes it's justified. Sometimes. I'm here to dispel it, though, because consider what just happened in that last part of this entry on the museum's website. Iconographic analysis, the reading of symbols for meaning. It is true, factually, that cemeteries in Europe are planted with cypresses. If you see a cypress, more likely than not, you're in a cemetery. So that's not a leap. But it's only logical or feels convincing if you happen to know that little bit of information about cypresses. So maybe let me make iconographic analysis a little bit more immediate. Let's see. Can we all agree that humans use symbols to communicate for us all the time? How many times, never mind, it's going to be impossible to count how many times a day you emoji instead of word. Yeah? You just picture and like, I don't even have to say anything. I make the joke, I'll make this joke in all my classes, I'll make it again here. How do you know to stop your car when there's a red octagon at the end of the road?
Like certain symbols are universally accepted to mean something?
Careful, mostly yes. What he said was, there are symbols that are universally recognized and accepted for what they mean. I'll take issue with the word universal. Don't go renting a car in Japan, that's not what their stop signs look like. True fact. We've agreed as a society that red octagon, that combination of color and shape in a certain context in a road, has power over the driver of a vehicle. That color, shape, context combination is a command. Yeah? But once you change the context, the meaning shifts. There are certain hand signals you should not make if you go into a foreign country and don't know what they mean, because it doesn't mean peace in the UK. Just saying. So, this is the question I actually want you to think about. How do you know what you think you know? How do you know what you think you know? Red octagon with some white text on it in a road means stop. How did you know that? You all know that, right? I hope you know that. Jeez, man. Be a passenger or something. How do you know that? Yeah?
The same understanding is widely known.
How are things widely known? I'm pushing, man. I'm pushing. Yeah.
We were taught that that's what it means.
Even before you went to yes, if you go to do your driving test, there's a book, you're supposed to read it and study it, and you're taught that that's what it means. I will argue that's not the first time you ever learned what it means.
Ever since the first time you were in a car, you saw everyone else stop at the stop sign?
Hopefully, when you are a tiny little wee one in a car seat, the driver understands the meaning of stop and they stop and you just learn it. You maybe were not taught it, but you learn it from your own context, your upbringing. I call it the baggage you walk around with all the time. It doesn't have to be bad, it's just what you know. But here's the thing, what if you're sitting in the back of the car and you're colorblind? It's not red anymore. You learn that the octagon, the gray octagon, let's say, with the text across it means stop. Right? If your circumstance changes, I don't know what the statistics are on colorblind being able to see color. I'm going to leave that aside for a second. If your context changes, but you don't change, you're setting yourself up for confusion, right? You're setting yourself up for a scenario in which what you think is true is not. It's no longer applicable. So revisit the question I asked you earlier, that little bit of discomfort when you're in a situation where there's no one clear solution to a problem. The formula that you've expected to apply is not working. The technique that you were taught to use doesn't yield the expected result. Panic. Well, I don't think any of you got the reference, but grab your towel, don't panic. That's a book reference, but let's move on. If we wanted to investigate this painting beyond astrophysics, we're not an astrophysicist. We want to know more about why Van Gogh painted it. Was he really, like, what we know or how to test that information? We have procedures for that. Van Gogh was a very prolific letter writer. He wrote to his brother all the time. In one of his letters, he has this quote. This morning, I saw the countryside from my window a long time before sunrise, with nothing but the morning star, which looked very big. The morning star is a common nickname for the planet Venus. And they can actually date when he wrote this letter to within a 1 or 2 week period of that year, because that's when the morning star would have been just rising from the direction of his window. It's like end of May, beginning of June, 1889. Is this the painting you think that text is referring to? Is there enough information in that piece of text to let us know that this is what he painted? Common wisdom about this painting is that, a lot like others, it was his view out the window from the mental hospital. Except that little village is not at the base of the mountains, and that cypress tree is not outside his window. That's not what the view is from his window. So let's see whether we can figure anything out from the sources, because now I've tried a hypothesis and it failed. Well, scientific method, try again. Here, same letter, new excerpt, we get a glimpse into his state of mind. He doesn't quite feel like his art is living up to his own expectations. In the realm of famous to like, wait, who now? Where's Van Gogh on the spectrum for you? Like, millions and millions on the art market. Van Gogh comes up for auction, it makes international headlines. He didn't really sell much. Someone mentioned he was not very famous or in his own day. His brother was an art dealer. He tried to help him out, but they weren't buying. Excerpt from the same letter. I hope you'll destroy a heap of things that are too bad in the whole heap that I sent you, or at least only show the passable ones. Does this sound like a man who's got a lot of self-confidence in his art? No, he legitimately suffered from a mental illness that he struggled with. Painting was a kind of therapy for him. To go out into nature, to observe phenomena, apparently to see the turbulence in the universe, and that's how he made sense of it. But he didn't become famous. He didn't actually become successful until after he had died. That's a downer. So let's see how we can make sense of this. As an art historian, what kinds of evidence did I look at? The actual artwork. I went and found letters that he wrote. I'm focusing in the world of the artist. To the question I asked you, how do you know what you think you know, can be kind of trippy, because even the word knowledge is not defined the same across disciplines. So let's talk about the word epistemology a little bit. It is centered in philosophy. It concerns the nature, the sources, and the limits of knowledge. How did you learn what a stop sign meant? That knowledge now exists. It's a fact in your head that symbol equals meaning. But it had to get there somewhere, right? We usually don't stop to think about how we know things, because we would get nothing accomplished that day if we thought about every thought we had. 2 basic problems of epistemology. 1, how can you be sure that you know the external world? There's a whole paragraph there, but how do you feel like you know anything about anything outside yourself? Hot takes. How do you get information about the world outside of you? Senses, sense observation. So there's 5 of them, I think, maybe 6, I don't know, there's debate. You see stuff, you hear stuff, you touch stuff, you taste it, right? You hear it. Here's a question. Does everybody observe the same phenomenon in the same way? No, they don't. So how can we ever be sure that the phenomenon that was observed is actually objectively existing if 5 people in the room saw it differently, or heard it differently, Or if I give you something to touch, one of you calls it fuzzy and the other one calls it spiky. So is it fuzzy or is it spiky? Can you see the problem? I can't know what's in any of your heads right now. I can guess, but I could be wrong. I know what's in my head. I do this all the time in my classroom. I put up one artwork, and I ask a group of 20, 30, 40 people to tell me what they see, and they all give me different details. One's looking at the top left, one's looking at the bottom, one cannot not look at the dog in the corner. They're all looking at the same artwork, but they're not looking the same way. So all of their knowledge, what they know about that artwork, I've got however many brains, that many different understandings. And there's no such thing as truth anymore, is there? Any historians in the room? Cool. Let's say you're having an existential crisis right now, because I said there's no such thing as truth. You're a historian. Where do you go first to investigate a question? What's your primary evidence? To the archives. Away. Okay. Here is a diary entry, personal record. It's in German. Don't try to read the squiggles. I got the English on the other side. Take a second, read this, and tell me, does it remind you of any artwork you've ever seen in your life? I see some nods. Does this remind, you think you'd be like, yeah, I got this one. I got this one. Guaranteed you've seen the artwork for sure, on your phone at least. Is this the one you're thinking of? Oh, yeah. So, this is primary evidence that is the priority of a historian. This is the text from the hand of the writer giving me their inner thoughts. An art historian would be like, yeah, sure, text, whatever, give me the work. Is this what you guys were thinking? Maybe? Yeah. That's where the emoji came from, by the way. This came first, then emoji, just to be clear. Obvious question, how does this make you feel? Keep it inside, this is not therapy. Does it make you feel is a yes or no question. Maybe you identify, maybe you're othering because you don't want to. This is called the scream. Who or what is screaming? Have you ever seen this before? Have you learned about this before? You know it's called the scream. Who or what is screaming? If you just looked at it, would you make an assumption about who or what was screaming? What would be your first assumption? That the figure, yeah, he looks like he's screaming. He's got his hands to his ears. He's got his mouth wide open. Not according to the text. According to the text, what is screaming? Nature. If I didn't give you the text, if I just gave you the image, you would come to a perfectly logical, plausible, believable, and true interpretation of a work of art that would not match archival evidence and yet could still be plausible, believable, and in a sense true. Scientists in the room, you're like, yeah, you got an N of 1. That's not good experimentation, right? Sample of 1. Let's say, okay, we're going to test other methods. In art history, we do a little bit of everything. We just did a little astrophysics. Now we're going to do a little history. Did you guys notice at the bottom of this artwork, there's a piece of text? When that is translated, here's a version of it. Looks very similar to what I showed you from his diary, right? It's almost word for word. Not quite, but nearly verbatim. He wrote that. Like, okay, N of 2 for the text, but still N of 1 for the image. Big deal. Well, he made a lot of them. He made 4 in color. He made a bunch of lithographs, which are prints. On the back of one of those prints is another replication of that same text. The best we can figure doing historical research is that this man had an experience, whether it was internal, psychological, or external is debated. There was a giant volcanic eruption on Earth around the same time, so the blood-red sky could have been true. You get enough volcanic ash in the atmosphere, sunsets get real intense. But maybe he also had a panic attack, because there's a history we know of mental illness in his family that he himself also suffered. So maybe he was out walking, he had a panic attack, and he turned it over in his mind. He wrote it out in his journal several times. He made several examples of an image, which is now famous and apparently has gotten stolen twice. returned, I think, both times. Stolen for ransom, by the way. So consider that these things can be simultaneously possible. A truth in the mind of a creator, an artist, and a totally separate truth in the reception of it in the audience. Reception theory. Art history deals with this all the time. Now we're a little bit psychology. How many of you are having a little bit of an existential crisis right now? Who am I? What's happening? Nothing is real. Well, if you ever eventually, read the book. Apparently, a sperm whale, improbably, manifests in the middle of the sky and has the first thoughts. It says, wait, what? Who am I? Wait, what do I mean by who am I? Because this is the process of investigation when the goal is not one answer. The goal is any answer that you want to ask. So now you're like, wait, what is happening? I thought you make an observation and then you ask a question and then all of the rest follows. Not necessarily. Maybe you don't make an observation. Maybe you just wonder something. Maybe you're just curious about something. Maybe something doesn't make any sense. It's not an observation. It's more like a feeling. Oh, buckle in. We're going to do some philosophy. This is a work of concept art. Read the title, look at the photo. How many chairs do you see in the photo? Does it match the title? Are all the chairs in the photo the same? No. If you ask the artist, he will tell you, I have made a work of concept art because the actual materials don't matter. Recycle the photograph, burn the chair in a fire, just put that definition in the shredder. The artwork still exists. Because my goal with this is to ask people to question, what is art? Does it have to be a painting? No. Does it have to be a sculpture? No. Stop being an elitist about it. It could be anything I say it is. Kind of trippy, right? So this is what the artist wants us to think. I have a totally different way of understanding it that I think is just as good. My ego is very, very healthy. Ready for Plato? Anybody, philosophers in the house? Yes. Don't call me out. We'll talk after. So Plato and the theory of forms. You don't have to read all this. It'll be here for reference. Step 1. Humans tend to mistake that the reason something exists equals what it is. We mistake existence, essence, for the details of it. And Plato is trying to tell us through Socrates that that's a fallacy. Just because you have a certain specific detail about you doesn't mean that's everything you are. Instead, we should think of something as existing perfect in a realm of ideas, in a realm of forms, but when it's manifested on Earth, it's become corrupted. Quick example, think of a tree. I say the word tree. You have a tree in your mind? Guaranteed you're all thinking of different species. Anybody from the Northeast? Pine tree? Anybody from Florida? Palm tree? Mine's a weeping willow. I don't know why, but it's always a weeping willow. They're all trees, right? But they're not the same. Plato wants to argue that somewhere out there in the universe is the conception of the essence of tree. But as soon as you manifest it in your mind, you've corrupted it. You've turned it into a species of tree, pine tree, whatever. So consider beauty. I could show one photo to all of you, and you would disagree on whether or not it was beautiful. But you all somehow innately have an idea of what is beautiful, right? It's not ugly. You have follow Plato's theory. Crash course, 35 seconds of Plato. We'll talk after. Go back to this one. 1 and 3 chairs. You see 3. There's a chair, there's a photo, and there's a dictionary definition of chair, a thing people sit on. Where's the 1? Imagine walking into a gallery, turning the corner, and coming across a chair, a photo, and a dictionary definition. What do you think your first word in your brain is going to be? Chairs! Guess what? Joseph Kosuth just incepted the word chair into your brain. There's the 1. It's in your brain. Concept art just made you think something. He just manipulated you by putting some random stuff in a gallery. Does that seem a little creepy? You turn a corner and all of a sudden, you have a thought that someone else put there? It kind of connects to Platonian philosophy, but we're doing art history right now. Okay, so We demand rigidly defined areas of doubt and uncertainty. Let's go back to firmer ground real fast. Ready? How do you know what a sperm whale is? In the book, one just randomly manifested in the sky. How does it even know what it is? Science. Maybe you find some bones and you measure them and you map them and you say, oh yes, this is a sperm whale. Or maybe you create encyclopedias, you measure them, you get the scale, etc. Yes, this is what a sperm whale is. It's not a baleen whale or a killer whale. Maybe you invent nice underwater photographic methods. You go and you, mama and baby whale, how cute. What if it's the 17th century and the only way you know about whales is when one of them washes up on shore? This is also a sperm whale. But what if you're in the 17th century and one washes up on shore and like that same week there's a solar eclipse? And later that week there's an earthquake. And later that week there's plague. What are you beginning to suspect about that whale? Harbinger of doom. And that's pretty much what they thought. Whales, bad omens. Because one washes up, it starts to decompose, it really, really stinks, people start to get sick. They're not necessarily connecting stink to sick. They're just like, whale, sign from God. If we dig into works like this, we can read the text down there. It's in Latin, I'm not gonna ask you to read it. But an art historian would investigate that. They would research, who is this? Who is Prince Ernst of Nassau? Why was it so important that he witnessed this beaching of a whale? But here's the question. You guys all feel pretty good you know what a whale is, right? Find it. It's in there. There's a whale in there. This is a work of Romanticist painting where the fact that it makes you look like you feel like you need glasses is kind of on purpose. Because it's not about the content, it's about the emotions caused by it. The overwhelming force of nature, the sublime. You should feel tiny and insignificant in the face of natural forces. That purple blob right here, that's a whale. See it? It is being hunted by a bunch of people on a boat that's being capsized. Today, Romanticism is a very well-regarded movement of art. Turner is famous. If a Turner comes up on the auction, lots of money. This one got sent back to him. He painted it for somebody, they didn't want it. And that guy made his money whaling, with a whaling business. He asked for a whaling painting, and he's like, what is this mess? So, you know, times change, context changes. So for example, story of Jonah. Does this look like a whale to you? Who's familiar with the story of Jonah and the whale? Who's not familiar with the story of Jonah and the whale? Yeah, that's a better question. Cliff Note version or Spark Note version or whatever you guys use these days. Jonah says no to a command from God. First mistake. He tries to run away. Giant storm ships him overboard. He gets gobbled up by a giant sea creature, hangs out in there for 3 days to think about what he's done. Finally repents, gets spit out by the giant sea creature, and is like, okay, fine, God, I'll do what you asked me to do. We're all caught up? Cool. What kind of creature? Any biologists? No? Kind of? Does that look like any sea creature you're familiar with? Yeah. What about this one? More like a recognizable sea creature? I don't know what kind of fish it is. It kind of looks like a carp, except the belly fins don't match. So if there's biologists who know more about fish than I do, just let me know. We'll talk after. The Hebrew text does not say whale. The Hebrew text says big fish. So when painters are painting or sculptors are sculpting Jonah and the whale, whale is only in the English translation of the Bible, not in the Hebrew that was written when the story was just big fish. So this is actually more accurate than a lot of people would give it credit for, if they're not going back to the original source of the narrative. Context matters, right? So at this point, we're like, wait, I don't even remember what the question is. So, yeah. If you don't know what the question is, how do you know what evidence to look for? How do you know how to answer the question if you don't know what the question is? Final theoretical thing, we'll talk about hermeneutics, the theory and practice of interpretation. Step one is to understand that there is a difference between types of knowledge. We talked about that. So consider there are sciences that study observed phenomenon. They catalog it, they quantify it, they define it. And then there are other disciplines that seek to understand those phenomena, such as arts or philosophy, etc. Then we have to understand that it doesn't equally to all people mean the same thing to exist. To understand existence is different. And then we understand that in art, I can't adopt the brain of a Roman from the 2nd century CE. I can try, but I will never know what it feels like to live in that time, in that place. I can attempt it, I can approach it, but basically I need to always keep in mind that I am at a distance from the thing I am studying. And that all that baggage I carry around in my head, where I grew up, what language I speak, what movies I've ever watched, how I know a stop sign is a stop sign, basically, I'm carrying that around with me. Every time I look at something, I'm already filtering it by what is familiar and what is foreign to me as an individual. And so this is a process. It's cyclical. The scientific method is cyclical, but that cycle starts way further down. I'm going to argue the cycle has to start right at the beginning. You interpret and you seek meaning, but your first question was already predicated on your assumptions that you made before you even started. If you're following what I mean, it can get a bit... Oh, really? I don't know what planet I'm on now. So let's start over. Concrete fact. What's a petunia? It's a flower. We could go to Lowe's and buy a nice pack of petunias, and we could probably go to gardeningknowhow.com and learn how much sun does it need, how much water does it need. We could go back to some old sources, a botanical register, and find a very beautiful artistic representation. This is a petunia, don't mistake it for a lily. Hard facts, right? Feel really reassuring. What about when people make art in order to understand what a petunia is and is not? 2 still lives of petunias. They don't look the same. They were made in different styles by different artists in different contexts. One, on the left, was trying for a kind of visible naturalism. It was supposed to look real. The one on the left started giving that up. It's like, I don't care that you see my brush strokes. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm making petunias. I'm making a painting. I'm going to make it look painted. But according to both of them, they were painting truth. They just defined truth differently. So if I go to Georgia O'Keeffe, who you may or may not have ever heard of, became famous in the early 20th century for being one of the earliest modernist American painters. A lot of what she painted were flowers, which should have an objective truth. They're flowers. It either is or is not a petunia. Except the way she painted it makes you kind of question how you're seeing it. Notice how she zoomed in on it a bit. It really fills up the field of the artwork. She's also made it very large. Not the biggest that has ever been painted. This is still 1924. But for the time, large scale. So she's interpreting her world from her own viewpoint to establish a kind of truth that was true to her, but could be true for other people if we figure out how to investigate it, what evidence we need to find, and what questions to ask. So to turn one final time to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, many have speculated if we knew exactly why the bowl of petunias said, "Oh no, not again," we would know a lot more about the nature of the universe than we do now. Well, okay. If we knew exactly why Van Gogh painted the way he did, we would know a lot more. If we knew exactly why O'Keeffe painted the way she did, we would have that knowledge. If we knew why any artist made what they did, yes, we would have the answers, but that would be really boring. And I'm not interested. Thank you. Do we have time for questions?
We do. We have time.
Okay. Philosopher, do you want to call me out on my 35-second Plato? You don't have to. I just mean, I did my best. Microphone, it's hard to hear.
The only thing maybe I would have called you out on it, maybe you knew this, in that Plato's Republic, he scorns artists at the end. He says that artists are like the what's really bringing his city awry, because art is just all imitation. But mainly I was just going to comment that I've heard other philosophers really kind of critique Plato, and I like how you phrased it at the end, that we're not really interested in the end question, because it becomes a question like, how do you know anything that
Correct.
you know?
Yeah.
To be honest, you don't. So.
There is a huge debate in philosophy that once it's manifested in your mind, the form has already been corrupted. So my interpretation of Kossuth, I acknowledge, I'm not a philosopher, man, but consider that neither of us is wrong, because there's no such thing as one right answer. And therein, mic drop moment, kind of, right? Cool, thank you. Yes? God, Kant, man, yeah. Okay, ask it again.
Oh, I was wondering, like, I think Kant did the same type of thing as Plato with transcendental idealism.
Yeah.
Like,
I almost put Kant in here, and I'm already 5 minutes over without him. He's a whole separate lecture.
okay.
So the idea that there is any kind of ultimate existing beauty or truth about aesthetics is simultaneously fascinating and hella problematic, because he's basically telling me that I should think this is beautiful even when I personally am like, no, I'm not going to put that in my house. So it's a debate between, is there such a thing as pure objective reality, or is it all perception? Psychologists have dabbled with this. Philosophy has tackled this. Reception theory is not an art historical theory, but it works really well with art history to say, forget the words, man, let's put up some good stuff. What you see is what you're going to get. And I'm emphasizing that phrase in a particular way because it is dependent. So Kant is foundational, but also really interesting to debate about art history. Oh, for sure. I'm glad you mentioned him, but we're going that's a wormhole to a whole other discussion. Yeah, thanks. Anything else? Doesn't have to be deep about philosophy or Kant. I mean, it could also be like, that one was pretty, put it back on the screen. That's fine too. Okay, can I ask you guys a question? Do I have any art history / museum studies / art studio people? Huzzah, hello, welcome, cool. Yes, but you don't count right now. Everybody else in the room but you three. Think about the potential relevance of what I talked about today for your own career ambitions, your own field of study. Maybe you got to write a thesis. Maybe you've got an exam next week. Maybe you were just asked the other day to prove something in a way that did not make sense. Or you're every day, professor asks you for something, you're like, I'm afraid of being wrong, so I'm not going to say it. I don't know if this is right, but I hear that phrase a lot. Consider what I'm trying to convince you of is not about the fact being wrong or right. Those will still be. This is still a thing that was made by Joseph Kossuth in around 1965. There are certain facts that you can research and test. Methodologically, in terms of a thought process, being open to exploring outside the invisible box that your mind is currently operating in, that there might be alternate ways to see a painting like an astrophysics problem, or a work of art like a philosophical problem. Do any of you feel like that might apply to the kind of work that you do? I'm not trying to turn you into art historians, but there are disciplines other than art history, I mean, I'm diehard art history, where it's not defined into one space. It touches and branches out all over. A bit of chemistry, a bit of philosophy, a bit of history, a bit of economics. Goes everywhere. What do you have?
So I'm in a class that's talking about climate change.
Climate change. Cool. Microphone is coming. Okay.
Do you want me to repeat or?
Yes, because they're not going to hear you.
Okay. I'm in a class that talks about climate change, and we're going from a perspective of there's a biologist,
Yeah.
there's an economist,
Yeah.
and there's an art major,
Awesome.
all in the class. So it kind of reminds me of how if you are a science major, you're going to look at climate change and think, okay, this is like the scientific method, whereas an
Yep.
art history person might look at artwork that has talked about climate change and how what they can bring to the table and their perception of it.
Yes.
And the interdisciplinary thinking of how to solve a problem with all three perspectives. So that's kind of
Yes. So climate change, if you're an ecologist, You're going to look at certain things. Do species disappear? Do new species emerge? Sorry, that's evolutionary biology. You're going to look at your evidence is not going to be the same as what an art historian might look about climate change. I have a tiny story about how climate change intersects with art history. There was an ancient civilization that emerged in the Indus Valley in what is now Pakistan and India, but at the time did not exist as a country. So Indus River Valley, Indus civilization. No fortification walls. They had indoor plumbing. They built grid-planned streets. What does that tell you about the culture? No fortification walls, they felt no external threats. Grid streets, city planning. Indoor plumbing, fresh water, cared about cleanliness, right? Big cities, also they had enough resources to feed the population. You don't make a big city you don't have people. You can't feed people without sufficient agriculture. We can't read their writing, but this civilization thrives for a certain period of time before then they disappear. No evidence of war. Just wind and time, dirt accumulates, cities get buried. They do not get rediscovered until the 1970s. From like 4,000 BC, 10,000 BC. I'm forgetting the dates right now. Why would they move? They seem to have it really good. Sufficient food, big cities, clean water. Why would they have disappeared? Wild speculations. We have no hard evidence. This is just somebody's best guess. It relates to what you're talking about.
Could have to do with the geography of where it was, and I mean, even with fortification, it can't always prevent against certain natural disasters.
No sign of earthquake. They found the cities. There's no destruction. There's no fire. There's no violence. They just, poof, disappeared. The best we can figure is that the course of the river shifted and their agriculture was affected. Effectively, climate change happened to them. So they picked up and they just moved away. We don't know where they went because we've yet to find any evidence of their particular way of writing and their particular way of making art. So it's like a little time capsule of, apparently, to the best of our assumption, peaceful, prosperous civilization. Their source of fresh water moved, so they had to move. And that is archaeology, art history. We wish we could read their writing, but it's indecipherable. Anybody a good code breaker? We could use you. And ancient ecology, ancient climate. It exists, it's real. So there is a need for brains who can think outside their own disciplinary ways of solving problems. It's like, okay, I'm an economist, but how would someone else solve this problem or attack this problem? What other kind of evidence is possible? Even if I don't think it's relevant, it's probably relevant. I just haven't thought of it yet. This discipline forces you to think of it because there are too many possibilities. There's no single one right answer on how to interpret a work of art. That freaks a lot of people out, but it's liberating for a lot of others. Thank you. Awesome.
That's all the time.
Okay.
So thank you for coming. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening.